On the agenda tonight, we're taking our third and final look at some of the guitar techniques that pop up during the analysis videos. I'm also going to be addressing some of the questions from Patreon about particular terms that are used when somebody's playing the guitar, so I'll be explaining those as well. Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus and welcome to another video. What I'm going to do is post a comment in the comment section. I'll pin it to the top so that you guys can click on the timestamps there to go directly to the term or the technique that you want to, just to make navigation a little bit easier. But let's jump straight into it. And this came up on Patreon. Somebody asked, is sweep picking and arpeggios the same? Arpeggios are notes of a chord, so the answer to that question is no, because you can pick out the notes of a chord. Sweep picking is a technique that includes arpeggios. So if I do a demonstration of notes of a chord, if I'm playing an A, those are my notes from the chord. That is called an arpeggio, but the technique I'm using in the right hand is sweep picking, because I'm sweeping across the strings on the way up and then sweeping back down again. And to begin with, what will happen is you can start with just a few strings. This is one of those techniques I haven't spent a hell of a lot of time playing because it doesn't fit into my style, because I can never think of these notes quickly enough to throw it into a lead. I tend to throw in notes that I can sing in my head first, and I'm kind of playing as I sing mentally. But going into the arpeggio, if I take 3 strings, that kind of sound, once you start speeding up, this is what a lot of sweep picking is, especially in the 80s and the 90s. It's just really sped up as fast as you can do it. And then people start to add in tapping as well, all that kind of jazz. Like I said, it's not one of those techniques that I've spent a hell of a lot of time playing, but the little that I have practiced it, I think that if I wanted to get it really fast, then I probably could do, but I don't really see the application for it in my music. If you do want to get into sweep picking, the important thing about practicing it is keeping it really evenly spaced, probably using a metronome if you can, unless you've got a really good internal metronome that you can be really strict with your picking. Try and keep it as even as possible. And with the top mainstream players, you tend not to see them playing loads and loads of sweep picked arpeggios, just one after the next. In fact, you don't see them at all really, especially in blues. You might see it a little bit in country, maybe those 3 strings. You might see one of those thrown in now and again. But in terms of the mainstream, there's not a hell of a lot of that sweep picking that goes on. One of the applications that you might find more in the mainstream is making the first note of a solo more dramatic by introducing a sweep over muted strings. For example, as you can hear, I'm playing 2 strings before I get to the first note that you can hear, just by muting them. Kind of like that. If I want 3 strings, it's going to make that first note that I do play more dramatic because it's had a little lead in. And just quickly, economy picking. This is one of those that gets thrown in with alternate picking. We had alternate picking earlier, where you pick the string, alternating the whole time. Economy picking is just how it sounds, being the most economical with your picking that you can be. For example, if I had a run like that and I wanted to get to the next string, I'm going in the wrong direction with my pick. Whereas if I change the direction to include a downstroke at the end of each run, it means that I can keep ascending through the strings the most economical way. I don't have to worry about going in the wrong direction with my pick. So that is economy picking. Another technique that pops up is hybrid picking, and this is when a player is playing with the pick and also the second finger and third finger from the right hand in order to accentuate part of the chord part of the lead if they're playing a particular lead that might be, they're using, like I did there, that third finger to strike that high E string. The next technique is bar chords, and I wouldn't really call this a technique per se, but they can take a long time to get nice and clean. All it is taking a chord from the bottom of the guitar, like your E, and then moving it up, but then replacing the bottom of the guitar with your first finger, because as you move up, everything's got to stay the same. So it means all of these notes here have to follow up with the E. And these are bar chords, moving up the guitar. And it's the same shape the whole way up. Like that. If I was playing an A, I would now, as I move up, have to bring the bottom of the guitar up with me. And this is where sometimes you'll see somebody play an A with a barred first finger, which means that as you move up the guitar, you can now supply that first finger and again, same shape all the way up. Kind of like that. So another rhythm technique that pops up is fingerstyle, which is where you do away with the pick altogether and just play with the fingers on the right hand. But just as a quick example, on the right hand you'd have a pattern. Sometimes you have a pattern that has a bass note that is changing. Kind of like that. Another thing that did get mentioned over on Patreon was a capo and what it does. And capos are there to either give you voicings of chords that you can't play because you literally can't bar it, or in the case of a few professional musicians who have never mastered bar chords, they use a capo, because if you imagine an E down at the bottom here, it's nice and easy, you can play that shape. As soon as you want to move that up, say you want to do that in the G position on the 3rd fret, you now have to play a bar chord. Whereas if I get my capo and place that there, it now means that I can play the nice easy version of the chord and I don't have to worry about bar chords anymore. And you can still play all of your shapes, G, and your D shape, and your A shape. Now of course, because the capo's here, this isn't an A, it's actually a C, because it's changed the pitch. And this is the important thing, that when you're using a capo, make sure that you're still aware of the chords you're playing and you're not always thinking you're playing an A, G, D. They do change as you move up the guitar. And the next term I'm going to talk about is power chords. And this is something that gets thrown around and a lot of people don't know what it means. So a power chord is a really basic version of a chord. Generally, this will be played with distortion and not something that you're going to see on acoustic guitars or clean sounding guitars, because you need the distortion to make two notes sound like a chord. And that is a power chord. All I'm doing is taking the lowest two notes from a standard chord, the root note and the 5th, and just playing those together. And the advantage that people have got by playing it that way, you can move it around really quickly. That kind of like that. You don't have to set your hand down in a bar chord position. Another thing you might have seen is adding that extra octave into this power chord shape, which will give you the root note, the 5th, and then the octave, like that. When you play that together, you get a slightly fuller sound. As you can hear with the overdrive, it really does fill in that sound, even though I'm playing a really basic shape. And the more overdrive you take out of the sound, obviously the weaker it's going to sound, because we've only got 3 strings sounding, and 2 if you played that original power chord that I was doing. But without that overdrive on there, you can start to hear it sounds a little bit weedy and not too much going on with it. So you need that overdrive in there to give you that sound. And this, you might be picking the strings out and you might have some chorus on that sound and a bit of delay, and that's up to you what you want to do with that clean sound. It's not going to be as obvious if you're picking out the strings, but obviously there isn't too many options if you're just picking out 3. You can try and make it interesting, but generally you'll want a whole chord position to be going on so that you get to pick all of those notes of the chord, that arpeggio. And finally, a question that we had on Patreon was about tones and what makes a good tone, and when do you need delay and reverb and other effects. And this is all personal preference, what you like the sound of. I personally like a thick tone for my lead sound. When I say thick, specifically I'm talking about having a good deal of middle in there as well as bass and treble. And on an amp you'll have bass, middle and treble, and tweaking those and trading off between one and the other will make your tone. That's what you will sound like. And some guys like to have a really piercing tone, in which case the treble, that top end, will be toned right up and they'll take out some middle and they'll take out some bass. Other guys want a bassy, a boomy sound, so they'll up that bass, have the middle in the middle, and then take out a lot of the high end. So it depends what you like the sound of. With the guitar, when you're playing on the bridge pickup is where we'll get the brightest sound. If I now take it down to the middle, in that middle section, you can hear how some of that top end nastiness has been taken away. Now, unfortunately on this guitar, or fortunately depending on how you look at it, I've got humbuckers in my bridge position and my neck position. So going into that neck position, isn't quite as a dramatic change in tone as you would get on, say, a Fender Strat. And this guitar is going to have a really thick tone all the way through because of the humbuckers that I've got on here. And just so you know, humbuckers are having 2 pickups right next to each other. It's like doubling the signal so that when you put overdrive onto that sound, it's got even more signal to work with, so you can get a lot heavier with your tone and with that distortion sound, because it's like having 2 signals instead of 1 on this single coil, which you'll see in the middle here, and you'll see single coils generally on Fender Strats. They just have 3 single coils, and you get a real variation on tone with those Fenders, and you do get a great variation tone here as well, but this is more geared towards the heavier sound. And just quickly, I mentioned about guitarists controlling their tones with their guitar and not having any effects on the floor or stomp boxes or anything else. And the way that that's achieved is with the tone. This is quite a heavy tone, quite distorted tone. So you can hear the distortion on there. If I wanted to get rid of that and roll off the gain from that sound and the distortion, I'd go to my volume. You can hear how I've taken a little bit of that sound out. If I roll off a bit more, it's taken even more of that distortion out. So by rolling off that volume, I've taken out that distorted sound. If I go back to 10 again, the distortion is back. So you've got a lot of options just on your guitar in order to change your sound. And this is something that you'll see top players doing between solos. They'll just slightly edit their tone by adjusting the tone on their guitar and the volume on their guitar, and also the guitar pickups going from, say for example, the bridge like this all the way down to the neck. You'll get that difference in tone that way. So putting all that together, it gives you a multitude of options just on your guitar in order to change your sound live without having to rely on a lot of pedals. The pedals like delay and reverb are going to embellish the sound when you're playing, because they're just adding an effect after whatever you've played on the fretboard. And again, that's just due to taste or due to the composition. So thank you guys for watching this video. I hope that it cleared up a few things for you and maybe answered some of your questions. If you did enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below, and I'll see you guys in the comment section of the next analysis video. Rock!